Chapter 11. Death, the Preceptor. The overnight rain has a rejuvenating effect in the parched region of Rajasthan. The dust has settled down and the atmosphere has a humid freshness. The earth is damp. Its fragrance still lingers in the air. All the trees are washed clean of the dust that had covered the leaves, and each one of them is scattering its own hue of green. The sun is in the subdued mildness, its reflection seen in hundreds of small puddles. The birds are involved with their multifarious songs and tunes, soothing the ears. The cattle and sheep are visibly relieved to find the puddles of the life-sustaining liquid. The calves and the lambs have a joy in their gait. A group of 100-odd people sit on a dry riverbed in a retrospective, if not a pensive mood. A few are speaking in whispers. Some of them are visibly disturbed, almost in a state of shock. Nearly 50 feet away, a funeral pyre burns reluctantly, the wet logs throwing more smoke than flames. The funeral pyre is of a teenaged boy who passed away the previous evening. The principal thought is playing in the consciousness of all those beholding the pyre is, if death can happen to this youth, it can definitely happen to me. Some of them realize that the death never takes the responsibility over its shoulders. Whenever we hear of a death, the first obvious question is, how did he die? There are many reasons like sickness, accident, or suicide. But we forget that death really needs no cause, but only an excuse, and in that excuse lies a hope that perhaps it need not happen to all. The boy's death thus goes into the background of explanations, and those on the cremation ground console themselves. Like the previous day's rain bringing back life into the apparently withered plants, the people accompanying the funeral procession return to their homes, are either overpowered by the day-to-day problems or are too frightened to continue the thought stream. Because the thought of death can be very disturbing, and no one wants to lose one's peace and quietude of treading the beaten track. This is the difference between the search for truth and the search for peace. While the search for truth is seldom peaceful, the search for peace can put us back to the metaphysical sleep of unconsciousness. From our somnambulism, death always appears alarming, at least during the moments of experience. Most of us want to avoid the disturbance that forces us out of our sleep. We like to continue our sleep, due to which most of us seek peace instead of truth. Most of us approach spirituality for attaining peace. Paradoxically, we get more disturbed when we start any spiritual practice. It's not that we did not have any disturbance before the practice. Only we were so unconscious that we were not aware of the inner disturbances. So, we choose only convenient, intellectual or cerebral path that only requires superficial commitment. Many a time, we leave the practice, which apparently increases our agony, conflicts and anguish, to curl back into the bed of somnambulism. Some of us, however, get tired of this eon-long sleep, and our sights get trained on the truth instead of peace. We notice that the disturbance forces us to question the life which we normally lead. It shakes us to our very roots, disturbing our view of life. It even asks us whether our so-called normal life is normal or not. It's a different matter that we lapse back into sleep. We try to explain away that death never comes without a cause, sickness, accident, old age, etc. But in the maze of these very explanations, we lapse back into metaphysical sleep. Death can become a gate for entering the home of truth. Death can induce the seed of query, and like all seeds, it has the great potential to become a life-transforming tree of awareness. Kathopanishad is a wonderful story of a seeker who has a voluntary encounter with death and accepts it as his preceptor. Among the Upanishads, the Kathopanishads stands in a category of its own. It blends itself the charm of a poem, the strength of philosophy, and the depth of mysticism. It contains a more unified exposition of spiritual insights of Vedanta than is found in any other single Upanishad. Its appeal is heightened by the two characters participating in its dialogue, young Nachiketa and old Yama. The Upanishad, in its 6 chapters, draws a fascinating picture of a young pulsating life, inquisitive and fearless, knocking at the doors of death, the terrible, and extracting from it the wisdom that lies beyond life and death. The story of Yama and Nachiketa is not told for the first time in this Upanishad. It appears in the Rig Veda in its 10th mandala, which speaks of a boy who went to Yama at the express desire of his royal father. The story appears in a more developed form in the Taittiriya Brahmana of a later period, where Nachiketa is granted 3 boons by Yama. The story in the Kathopanishad corresponds in all the essential details with that of the Brahmana. The single point of variance lies in Yama's reaction to the 3rd boon, through which Nachiketa asks Yama to tell him how to conquer death. In the Brahmana, the answer to the question is the performance of a certain ritual, which is nothing but a repetition of the answer to the 2nd boon. The answer to this question, given in Kathopanishad, lifts the subject from sacrifices and rituals to the subtlest level of moral striving and spiritual realization. This little variance makes all the difference between hedonistic, heaven-centered theology and a spiritual, man-making philosophy as observed by Swami Vivekananda. The Upanishad begins with the scene where Vajasravas was giving away everything to win the whole world by performing a ritual called Vishwajit Yajna. In a way, Vajasravas has nothing to do with religion. On the contrary, it was only a business deal with the divine. Most, if not all, have only this shallow understanding of religion. We visit temples, offer prayers and money or food to the deity of the temple, distribute alms to the beggars in expectation or after the fulfillment of our cherished desires. Obviously, such shallow view makes us blind and forces us to commit some fundamental mistakes. Vajasravas was giving away useless cows which had eaten their fodder and had crossed their lactation period. Son Nachiketa, standing nearby, saw it easily and did not want his father to be wanting in ethics or to be inhuman and insensitive in his dealings. Cultured that he was, Nachiketa, wanting to point out his father's obvious mistake, asked his father as to whom he was being given away, since the son rightfully belonged to the father and the father was expected to give away all his possessions. Each one of us has a very strong ego which stops us from being open-minded to learn. Nothing is as insulting to a father as a son offering him a suggestion, much less pointing out a mistake. Vajasravas was very much aware of his grave mistake of giving away the useless cows, but when the son reminded him of his duty of giving away everything, including the son himself, his ego got rubbed on the wrong side. Vajasravas remained silent for the first 2 times, but he really said much through the silence. If the son was clever and worldly wise, he would have understood and withdrawn from the scene. But Nachiketa was much too innocent and a great lover of truth to understand the heavy silence of the father. So he repeated the question the 3rd time, only to get an annoyed outburst from the father that he had decided to give him to death. This is a natural reaction by the father. This is the very ego that has been haunting him. A father always thinks that if the son has been brought into this world by him, he has every right to exterminate him. The story continues with the stream of thought in Nachiketa. He wondered as to what did the father intend achieving through him by sending him to the plane of Lord Yama. Nachiketa knew that he was better than many, though many may have been superior to him. Requesting his father to contemplate on the noble actions of the ancestors as well as the present wise men, and observing that like a crop man departs from and returns to the earth, he took leave of his father to depart to the plane of death. Many noble truths are suggested through the words. First of all, they speak of the guilelessness and a total trust of Nachiketa when he takes the words of his father literally. Second, and perhaps principally, is his love for truth, because he wants to know more about death as he is prepared to leave this gross plane. And the third is his deep understanding of the life on earth as repeated entry into and exit from the gross world. Having left his father, Nachiketa reached the plane of Yama, but as the Lord of Death was not available, he had to wait for 3 nights without food. This is another truth which the Upanishad hints. Whenever and wherever the death comes, we are always available, but when we voluntarily seek death, it's not available. It also gives the hint of seeking death voluntarily, not through suicide, as many timid people resort to for running away from problems, but by entering the night, which according to Vedanta means developing disinterest in the external and or gross world of senses by going without food. Food not only means the food we take through pellet to nourish the body, but all food that enters through the senses which activates the mind. Disinterest and the control of senses is the path of entering the world of death voluntarily. Yama offered 3 boons, 1 for each night, to Nachiketa. The first boon asked by him was that the disturbed father should recognize him and be in a pleasant mood when Nachiketa was sent back to the normal world. When it was granted, Nachiketa observed that there is no fear in heaven as death is not there, and nor is there any old age. So he sought the secret of the fire sacrifice which leads one to heaven as the second boon. Yama not only granted the boon, but named the fire sacrifice after Nachiketa as an extra boon. For the third boon, Nachiketa asked a clarification for a doubt. He observed that some say that man exits after death, and some say that man does not, and that this doubt can be clarified only by the death. With this question starts the Upanishad proper, and a wonderful dialogue which is perhaps one of the most profound in such literature. Incidentally, this was the favorite Upanishad of Swami Vivekananda to the extent that he took his watchwords Arise, awake, stop not till the goal is reached from it. As mentioned in an earlier essay, the deep truths of spirituality cannot be given to anyone or everyone who approaches the enlightened Guru. The Guru always avoids and tests the aspirant to measure his sincerity and intensity of his thirst to know the truth. It's not that the preceptor is not interested in spreading the wisdom, but the nature of truth is such that without meeting the minimum eligibility norms, it will not only go over the head of the aspirant, but may even do him positive harm. With the deep question from Nachiketa started a high drama by Yama. First of all, Yama said that the question of what happens after death has confused even the gods, and so it would be better for Nachiketa to seek some other boon. Behind this avoidance lies the fact that Nachiketa is but a child and that the question is too subtle for him. Yama wanted to find out whether there is an idle curiosity behind the question. At the same time, Yama also threw a great hint at the questioner to see whether he was alert and prepared. Spirituality differs from religion as it is commonly understood. Most of the religions speak of heaven and hell as the aftermath of death. The aim of many, if not most religions, is to reach heaven after death. The truth is that heaven and hell are but mental concepts of happiness. Heaven means one feels happy in others' joy, while hell is happiness in others' misery. But in both, the attention is on the other, whereas spirituality slowly but steadily brings the attention on to oneself and merges the other into it. This was being hinted by Yama when he said that even the gods are confused. This is a great revelation if caught by the aspirant, but normally such deep hints are not caught by the insensitive. Many times when some people visited Sri Ramakrishna and started asking him philosophical questions, he would not answer the questions. Instead, he would involve them in some general conversation. If the questions were only meant for the intellectual entertainment, they would easily get caught in the flow and forget the question. Or Sri Ramakrishna would start talking about the decoration in the temple and ask them to go there to enjoy it. If their thirst was genuine, then they would not get distracted and would stick to their inquiry, as in the case of Nachiketa, who says that if it is confusing even to God, that is the only fit query to be the third boon. Moreover, asked Nachiketa, who else will be a better preceptor than Yama, the death to clarify the doubt? His valid observation is that death is the one which snatches us away from the world of objects, the other, to bring the attention on to oneself. Yama must have been quite satisfied at the performance of the disciple. To test the level of disinterest in Nachiketa in the gross objects, Yama placed before the innocent child all kinds of temptations. He offered him sons and grandsons who would live 100 years, many cattle, elephants, horses, and much gold with immense territory. And for Nachiketa he offered as long a life as he desired. Realizing that he had not made any dent in the determination, Yama offered him all the pleasures that are difficult to get on earth, heavenly damsels, chariots and musical instruments, in lieu of the question on death. The temptation appears too harsh on the boy Nachiketa. It's not just a story, but it really happens to a person entering the world of meditation. If one succeeds in entering the meditative state, one becomes extremely sensitive, capable of deriving great happiness even out of small things. With meditation, the senses get purified and the clouds of otherness covering them get eliminated. A meditative mind enjoys the beauty of nature much more intensely than an ordinary scattered mind, because all the energy is available as it's not being wasted through the mind and senses going after all objects. As and when the mind becomes more and more meditative, enjoyment increases. The whole world becomes heavenly and highly enjoyable. Many times, seekers fall from the heights of meditation, as it happened in the case of Vishwamitra, when Menaka, the celestial nymph, tempted him. This is a great paradox. Meditation helps us develop sensitivity through alertness, but if one gives attention to only the sensitivity instead of alertness, then one falls. A fallen yogi is called as Deva or God by our scriptures. If one is able to remain steady and alert, then the seeker succeeds in transcending the attraction for the sense objects permanently. Nothing could shake Nachiketa. With each temptation kept by Yama before him, he became more determined to stick to his demand. His line of argument was that if Yama was offering him so many temptations in lieu of this query, then the answer to his query must be much more valuable than the temptation. The reaction from Nachiketa reveals his wonderful understanding about existence. Shvobhava martasya yadantakaitat sarvendriyanam jarayanti teja api sarvam jivitamalpameva tavaiva vahas tava nritya gite. All the pleasures you have offered are transient, O death. They wear out the vigor of all the sense organs of mortal man. Moreover, all life, long or short, is only alpam, little, from the point of view of eternity. Let thy chariots, dance and song remain with thee only. This statement gives enough proof for Nachiketa's alertness. His observation is not new, but is our common experience. However, most of us are not alert to it. We enjoy a good dish, but through repetition our enjoyment reduces until such time when instead of enjoyment we suffer. This happens with all our sense enjoyments. While meditation increases the power of senses, the sense indulgence reduces the same power and also makes us more gross and insensitive. The price for indulgence and involvement is our alertness. As it is, life is characterized by the metaphysical sleep, and sense indulgence takes us deeper into the unconscious. Moreover, in spite of all the temptations, Yama never offered him immortality. Nachiketa observed that no matter how long or short, life is alpam, small or petty, because life is always associated with the gross body, senses and mind, which in turn are transient and always in a state of flux. There is a beautiful story of King Yayati. Yayati became old. He felt that although he had lived for 100 years, he had not totally enjoyed life. He came to know that if someone offered his youth to him and accepted his old age, he would become young again. All his sons refused, except the youngest son who offered his youth. When asked why, the son was prepared for this extraordinary sacrifice. The son observed that if his father felt unfulfilled even after living 100 years, it was obvious that the desires can never be fulfilled even after 1,000 years. Nachiketa observed that fulfillment can never come through wealth and other transient objects, especially when the death is experienced through growth, illness, old age of the body. Continuing, he said that having met Yama, one can never retain the taste for objects. Death of a near and a dear one also brings the tidings of our own death. If someone were to know that he or she has only a limited period to live, maybe due to some grave disease like cancer, all the taste for objects falls off on its own. It's not that one has to know about one's own death. Even indirectly, we experience death. When someone dies, a part, no matter how small in us, dies. Concluding his argument, Nachiketa said that nothing can replace the boon he has asked of Yama, because the only thing he would like to know is the consequences of death. Yama must have been overjoyed to have a disciple like Nachiketa. Lord Yama found that Nachiketa fulfilled the 3 prerequisites for embarking on an adventure into consciousness. He had vairagya, the total interest in the objects of senses, due to the fact that he had learned the art of diverting the consciousness inside. His priority for the attention had changed. He was a Dhridanishchayi of unshakable conviction in what he intended doing. The fact that nothing could disturb him from sticking to the third boon is proof enough. The last but not the least requisite is abhayam, fearlessness. Fear and greed go hand in hand. A greedy man can be easily frightened. Xuanzu used to work for a king as his aide. On reaching middle age, Xuanzu decided to leave the king's court and preferred to lead a spiritual life. As was the custom in those days, the king allowed him to leave. After many years, the king went for a hunting expedition in a deep jungle. During the hunt, he was told that Xuanzu lived nearby under a tree. Remembering the services of his ex-aide, the king was eager to meet him and expressed his desire to his companions. On reaching the spot, he found his ex-aide sitting relaxed under a tree, playing on his instruments. His legs were spread, his feet were pointing in the direction of the king. It was considered uncivilized to sit like that in front of the superiors, especially a king. The king approached Xuanzu and observed that it was fine that he had chosen the noble life of spirituality, but spirituality did not mean that one should forget all the etiquette that governed the society. Xuanzu smiled at the king and said that while in his court, etiquette was necessary as he had something to fear due to greed, for the king could definitely fulfill his desire and he was an employee. But now he neither had any desire nor was the person standing in front of him his employer, not even a king. He was only a traveler. No one expected him to follow the etiquette for all the travelers frequenting that jungle. For Alexander, life had been constant struggle with challenges. He had learned much from Aristotle, the father of reason and scientific thought. His ambition had been so great that to realize it, he had even killed his own father to ascend the throne of Macedonia. Leaving his own kingdom, forcibly uniting the warring Greek states, he had conquered Asia Minor, Syria, Egypt, Babylon and Persia. All these conquests had been quite easy for him and his army of 35,000 men. But when he entered the northern India, it was not so easy. In spite of his better military equipment and tactics, he faced a very stiff resistance from the local king Porus. On probing into the reasons for this unusual challenge, he discovered that the motivation of these strange people was entirely different. They were not so attached to the bodies as his soldiers were, which made them fearless. And finally, defeating Porus and his forces, Alexander had now to face rebellion from an unexpected quarter, his own men. There had been a mutiny and his forces refused to move further into Gangetic plain. This was no doubt a dark day in his so far successful life. He felt that he should have expected this behavior from his men some time or the other. He had left the comfort and warmth of their home. They had left the comfort and warmth of their homes years back, and it was obvious that they would feel homesick. Reluctantly, he began his journey to Macedonia. More than all these factors, he was shocked to realize that in spite of all his conquests, he was nowhere near any sense fulfillment. On the contrary, he felt more empty. He had grown more restless, impatient, and irritable than before. Suddenly he remembered the words of that magnificent naked beggar whom he had seen on the sands of a beach, who had appeared more regal than him. When he, who had begun his conquest, had asked him why he, with all his regalia, felt so naked in front of the naked mendicant Diogenes the beggar, Diogenes the beggar smilingly replied that all he had to do was to remove the regalia and to lie down on the sands beside him. Alexander had foolishly, that was what he felt presently, observed that he had the world to conquer. Diogenes had said that nothing could be achieved even by conquering the whole world. It is said that Alexander never recovered from his shock and died at Babylon. This has been the experience not only of Alexander the Great, but also of many persons like him who have been trying to nurture their ambitions. The legend says that Diogenes was a strange mystic who roamed about naked. His only possession was a glass for drinking water. Once, as he was drinking water on a river bank, he saw a dog lapping the water happily. Seeing the dog, he realized that if the dog could live without any possessions, he too could, and threw away even that glass. The inner contentment, peace and bliss he experienced and radiated, in spite of his nakedness and penury, could make even the Alexander suffer from envy. There have been many persons like him, Lao Tse, the Buddha, Jina Mahavira, the Christ, Prophet Muhammad, to name a few, whose very presence ushered in peace, harmony, compassion and love into lives of those who came in their touch. These persons have been like the sentinels guarding the human conscience, contributing positively towards the sanity of humanity. Alexander and Diogenes represent the two different directions of human behavior. Alexander belongs to the normal class of people, treading the beaten track of external or material achievement. Most of us treat this track as we are able to perceive the external world through our senses. We see, hear, smell, taste and touch the external objects through our senses. We even perceive our own selves as the body with its particular form. Senses as such develop due to the external objects. Apparently, we experience pleasure when our senses and mind come in contact with the sense objects. Our consciousness only flows outwards in search of objects. The notion of pleasure during the sense contact with their objects is so deep that we are interested only in them. Consequently, we spend most of our energy in increasing them. We may be externally prosperous due to what we have, but internally paupers. And our external position may be very important, but internally impotent. As long as there is inner poverty and impotence, the external achievement is of not much consequence. For survival, external achievements do matter, but not in facing death, which is the only inevitable event in life. Objects may bring in false sense of pride and knowledge, but not sensitivity and wisdom. Diogenes belongs to a very rare class of persons who are more concerned about their being than possessions or power. The priority in life of persons like Diogenes is the search for the eternal and the permanent. Ancient Indian tradition recognized these two dimensions of development. In his introduction to the Bhagavad Gita, Acharya Shankara says, Dvividho hi vidokto dharmaha pravritti lakshano nivritti lakshanascha. There are only two types of human nature, of involvement and of non-involvement. Lord Yama told Nachiketa about these two dimensions. He called them Preyas, or the search for pleasure, and Shreyas, or the search for the good and the truth. Preyas apparently tries to fulfill the desire but never succeeds. It is like a mirage which gives an appearance of water, but as one goes near, it disappears. Preyas forces the consciousness outward, as it is based on the notion that pleasure is achieved through the contact of senses with their objects. Most of us entertain this notion because the crowd is doing so. The crowd is involved with the external world because it is easy and convenient. The inward search poses a lot of difficulties initially and is apparently unnatural. As and when Viveka dawns on a person, experience tells him clearly that the happiness outside is only apparent, and in the end it leaves us empty and depressed. Such a person is bold enough to leave the beaten track. Shreyas is defined by Amarakosha as Shreyasam Shivam Bhadram Kalyanam Mangalam Shubham. Shreyas is the ultimate, good, beneficial, benign, auspicious. On discovering that, Nachiketa fulfilled all the necessary conditions for spirituality. Lord Yama happily started teaching Nachiketa by going into all the details necessary for treading the path. In the 20th century, life after death has been a hot topic for research in the field of parapsychology. A lot of documentation has been done by studying people who have near-death experiences, such as those who were declared clinically dead were revived later, or those who met with accidents and experienced death for a short time to recover shortly. Whatever be the details of the experiences of these subjects, whether they can be accepted by the community or not, the life of many, if not most, of the subjects has changed. Their tastes and values have changed. Indian spiritual tradition has always suggested the remembrance of death as a very valuable practice to bring in a transformation. Death has always generated a special interest among different cultures. Carlos Castaneda, an anthropologist who met Don Juan, a Yaqui Indian master, had the following conversation. Death is our eternal companion. How can anyone feel so important when we know that death is stalking us? The thing to do when you are impatient is to turn to death and ask advice from it. An immense amount of pettiness is dropped if your death makes a gesture to you, or if you catch a glimpse of it, or if you just have the feeling that your companion is there watching you. I argued that it could be meaningless for me to dwell upon my death, since such a thought would only bring discomfort and fear. You are full of crap, he exclaimed. Death is the only wise advisor that we have. Whenever you feel as you always do, that everything is going wrong and you are about to be annihilated, turn to your death and ask him if it is so. Your death will tell you that you are wrong, that nothing really matters outside its touch. Your death will tell you, I haven't touched you yet. Most of our desires are petty, as they cater only to the temporal needs. Death gives us a glimpse into the possibility of transcending it. Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa used to advise all the seekers to constantly remember death for developing vairagya or dispassion. The story of Gautama Siddhartha is known to all of us. On seeing the funeral procession, the course of his life changed completely. His search for the eternal truth, which transcends death, ended in his becoming the Buddha. The search for the eternal begins after seeing death. Death, thus, is the greatest of the preceptors. Whoever meets death is bound to become an adventurer of consciousness. Most of us hide from death, as wherever we see death, we divert our attention to something else. This avoidance of death has made us what we usually are: frightened, gross, unaware, and in deep slumber. Acceptance of death as an eternal companion is the first step in the spirituality. In that acceptance, the fearful aspect of death gets transformed into benevolent one. Every intimation of death is an open invitation to the surviving for an adventure into learning that it is an inevitable crescendo of life, that though it is the culmination of the temporal body-mind, if one is able to face it with total awareness, it becomes a door into life eternal, and that death is the greatest of teachers.